What a crazy final week of the PWHL season as the final playoff spot came down to the final game. Ottawa failed to win 2 games and were pushed out of that 4th spot by Boston. And nothing was going right in Minnesota, but they did squeak in with a little help from PWHL Toronto. And speaking of Toronto, they got to pick their first round opponent. Did they play it safe or give a team some bulletin board material? What's going on, everybody? Rob Pizzo, Saroya Tinker back. We both got big smiles on our faces because guess what? It's playoff time in this inaugural PWHL season. That being said, I want to get your opinion on what happened at the end of the season because you could not have asked for more drama. That last spot coming down to the last game. Before we preview those 2 series, your thoughts on how the season ended?
Well, I mean, I think it shows the parity in the league. I mean, it was a fight till the very end. We saw that last game, Ottawa needed to win, and then Boston coming through and beating Montreal. I mean, it was crazy. We were sweating in studio.
It doesn't help that the first place team didn't sit back and relax, and they'd clinched first place, but they wanted to beat Ottawa.
Exactly. That's exactly what Troy Ryan said before the game. He said, we're not going to sit back. We're going to play this game just like every other game. We're getting ready for playoffs, and that's what he did in playing Campbell, putting Nurse and Malte together. They were on their game.
All right, so Toronto finishes first. That earned them the right to choose their first round opponent. Would it be Minnesota? Would it be Boston? And despite the fact that they want you to believe that Natalie Spooner's son, Rory, made this decision and it was all about fate, a lot went into the decision.
So we looked at all different angles. We talked to our leadership group. We leaned on their athletes, just what they're feeling and how they feel against all of these opponents that we got to choose from. I obviously looked at analytics and numbers, how we matched up against these teams throughout the season. You want to also look at the more recency of the teams and how they're doing at this time frame of the season.
All right, first off, would you have taken Minnesota?
I think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure that goes into being that first place team, and you don't want to end up with egg on your face, so you pick the 4th place team. And Minnesota hasn't been hot lately. We know that they almost lost their way out of playoffs even. So if I'm Toronto, I'm definitely choosing Minnesota. We know they're not too hot. They're dealing with injuries, and I think it was a smart decision.
This is the first time we've ever seen anything like this. I love the rule, just to put it out there. I love the fact that it adds a little bit of drama. But I remember after Toronto clinched first place, Natalie Spooner was asked, who would you rather play by the press? And she said, I'm sure we're going to have a group discussion about this. And I thought, no, you're not. That's a coach and GM decision. What are you talking about? Then we watched the press conference yesterday, and something they reiterated many, many times was they went to their veteran group and wanted their opinions, not only on the team and the players, but things like travel, everything else. Are you surprised that they brought them in as much as they did?
Not at all. As a former player, I think you need your player perspective, whether it's your veterans, the whole team. They're the team out there on the ice playing against their opponents. So I definitely think that their opinion should come into play, and their coaches and GM should take that into consideration. And they did. I mean, Natalie Spooner, Sarah Nurse, Blair Turnbull, all big names. We're not a fast. I mean, they should have a say in who they're going to get to play and who they want to try and beat in playoffs.
What Minnesota team are we going to see? I mean, if you would have asked that question 5 games into the season, 10 games into the season, I would say, this is going to be a tough matchup for Toronto. But no team has stumbled into the playoffs like Minnesota. 5 straight losses, just 7 goals in those games, but we've seen them play really well as well. What Minnesota team's going to show up?
I mean, I think it's up for grabs. I think Minnesota has played well, but at the same time, they almost lost their way out of playoffs, and they're dealing with injuries. They definitely rely heavily on Taylor Heisey and Zumwinkle, and their defensive core needs to be stronger as well. I think there's been a few mistakes made on their defensive ends, and I think heading into playoff hockey, you have to hone in on those small things. And again, those injuries, they affect you, but again, they need Taylor Heisey to be out there.
So Toronto takes Minnesota, leaving Boston for Montreal. And you and I talked on the last episode about, if you get chosen by the first place team, you should be insulted and that's going to motivate you. But I never thought about the team that didn't get chosen. And Boston's been playing really well, but that's got to be a bit of, a confidence boost. Flattering, I'll even put out there, that the best team in hockey says, I don't want to face you. I mean, you think that gives Boston a little bit of that boost?
Well, I said it before. I think any season that I've ever played in, there's always been a team that's hot all season and kind of falls off, and then there's a team that hasn't been hot all season and picks up during the playoffs, and I think that that's Boston. I think we have expected a lot out of their lineup, and maybe they're ready for playoffs. And, I mean, I'm happy not facing Toronto as well if I'm Boston, but then again, you got Poulin there as well in Montreal, so I'm a little nervous still if I'm Boston.
I don't care that it's a team sport. There's always a marquee matchup. And for this one, it's MPP versus Hilary Knight, two of the faces of women's hockey for so long. Of course, that was a topic that was brought up at the press conference. Here's what Hilary Knight had to say.
You know, from a fan's perspective, if I can just step out of just me as a competitor, I think it's, you know, this is what you want. You know, you hear about these two names and what an incredible matchup for them, and a true original six matchup, right? So I think that's pretty exciting from a fan's perspective, and from a team perspective, we're just going out there. We're going to follow the game plan wherever our coaches guide us, and we're going to try and win and do that at whatever cost that we need to pay out there.
Now, Poulin downplayed it. No, it's not, you know, 1 versus 1. It's team versus team. But for me, I want to see these two go head to head.
Of course, and any time these two are on the ice, you have to be aware. We know that they are some of the greatest women's hockey players to ever play the game, and they're leaders on their team. When they step on the ice, they elevate everyone else around them, and I think that that's the fear factor that they have. I'm definitely being aware if I'm playing defense against Hilary Knight or Poulin, so I think it makes for a great matchup.
All right, you're talking about all this depth and teams that are playing well. I'm putting you on the spot, and I'll make my predictions too. And remember, predictions in our business, we brag if we get them right. If we didn't, then we just forget we ever made them. Give me a prediction for each series, and I want the number of games.
Oh, geez. I'm going Toronto in 3, and I'm going
Sweep.
Montreal in 5.
I'm going to take Toronto in 4. I think Minnesota steals one at home, and I'm going to go Boston in 5. They are playing some really good hockey. Saroya, thanks as always. And remember, we got you covered here, Hockey North, throughout the PWHL playoffs. We'll see you next week.